The building woke before the sun did, humming with vents and elevators and that faint scent of lemon polish that clings to marble. From the 52nd floor, San Antonio looked small and orderly. The river walk, a silver thread, the old cathedral bells, a memory more than a sound at this height. Rick Sawyer liked it that way. Numbers lined up neatly for him here. Doors opened when he nodded. The glass reflected only what he chose to see. He checked the time, straightened a tie no one would dare criticize, and pressed the intercom. His voice came out even practiced. "Send in the cleaning team." He did not say please. He rarely needed to. Carmen Martinez came first, careful hands on a cart stacked with cloths folded like altar linens. Her daughter trailed close, a slim girl with a backpack whose zipper had learned to behave. The girl held a plastic library card between two fingers, the way someone else might hold a ticket to a ballgame. On her wrist, a red woven bracelet tucked under the cuff, bright as a stoplight and gone in a blink. "Morning," Carmen said softly. She kept her eyes on the edge of the desk, as if politeness lived there. Rick tapped a leather folder. "I've got something entertaining for you." The corners of his mouth tipped into a smile that wasn't warm. He opened the folder and spread a sheaf of photocopies, tidy columns of unfamiliar characters, a scattering of notes from experts who'd shrugged and billed anyway. 5 translators tried. "I'm not convinced the city hires the sharpest knives." Carmen shifted her weight. "We'll stay out of your way, sir. I insist you stay in it for a moment." He turned to the girl. "What's your name?" "Lucille." He glanced at the library card again. A child with a card. It was almost quaint. "Lucy, would you like to read something for us? Anything at all." He tapped the first page with a pen. "Pick a line." The girl stepped closer, steady enough to make him notice. She didn't grab for a page. She watched, the way careful people do before they touch a hot pan. "I don't claim I can yet," she said, and it was an answer that did not apologize for existing. The room held its breath. Down the hall a copier started, like rain on a tin roof. Rick leaned back. "Humor me. Carmen's hands tightened on the cart handle. "Mr. Sawyer, we can clean another floor first." "It's fine," he said. "It'll only take a minute." Lucy laid her library card on the corner of the desk, a little flag that said who she was without noise. The bracelet slid into view again, then hid. She scanned one short paragraph as if tracing a riverbed with a finger. Not speaking yet, just learning the bends. "Some of these characters share a root," she murmured, almost to herself. "My teacher calls them radicals." She swallowed, looked up. "I might recognize parts, but I won't pretend I can read it all." Something in him lifted an eyebrow. Honesty can be a sharper instrument than bravado. "Proceed," he said. She tried a line, slow and careful. The tones wavered, then found a level place to stand. She corrected herself without prompting, the way someone backing a truck straightens out and tries again until it's right. She didn't show off, she explained. "When a sound goes high and stays there, I hold it like humming. That helps." Rick's smile thinned. He had wanted a circus trick or a collapse. What he was getting was work. "And where exactly did you learn any of that?" "At the public library," Lucy said. "We have language night. Volunteers help." She glanced toward the window, as if the Riverwalk might nod along. "It's slow, but it's kind." "Kind." He set his pen down. "Kindness won't get a document translated." "No, sir," she said, "but kindness helps people keep trying." The elevator dinged somewhere. A silver bell in a different church. Rick turned his attention to Carmen. "Does your shift end at 4 today?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Then you can come back tomorrow at 4:30. We'll set aside another minute for your daughter's effort." Carmen opened her mouth, thought better of it, and nodded. The girl reached for her card, the bracelet flashing and gone. The moment loosened, like a knot that hadn't really been tied. They cleaned. Rick watched the city and answered 3 emails, each sentence a little verdict. When they left, the office returned to its usual order. The papers waited where he'd placed them, patient as winter grass. By nightfall, he was on the other side of town, the kind of place his staff thought was quaint and he pretended he didn't enjoy. Magnolia Pancake House glowed like a friendly porch light. A server in a neat apron called him Sir, with no sarcasm at all. He ordered coffee and a short stack and ate without hurry, listening to the clink of forks, the casual way people thanked one another. He left a 20% tip because that's what you did here. The habit had started as calculation and become something else. Driving home, he passed the Market Square banners strung between poles like laundry. A memory knocked a night years ago. Laughter in a photo booth. Paper strips still warm. He filed it with the other things he didn't need to examine and drove on. Morning returned. Clean and agreeable. The glass tower breathed in, breathed out. Somewhere below the 52nd floor, a truck rumbled on a loading dock. Somewhere above, a plane stitched the sky with a white seam. He called for coffee, reviewed projections, and told himself the girl would not return. People rarely do the hard thing twice. They did. Carmen's cart came first. The hum of its wheels familiar as a hymn verse you don't realize, you know by heart. Lucy followed with the same backpack and the same card, as if the previous day hadn't asked anything heavy of her. She glanced at the folder but didn't reach for it. Politeness lived where she put her gaze. The bracelet peeped out, red as a promise. Rick opened the folder again. The pages weighted like a puzzle left on a table between meals. "Let's make this quick," he said. "I've got a call at the hour." Lucy nodded. She stood where the light was good. She didn't start with a sound this time. She started with a question. "May I ask how many languages you speak, sir?" He heard the words, recognized the trap, and stepped in anyway. "Enough to read a balance sheet in 3 markets," he said. And then, because pride is a machine with its own switch, added, "Fluently? 1. That's all I've needed." I'll laugh. She looked at him steadily. And it wasn't insolence. It was a kind of patience older than she was. "Then maybe this isn't a fair contest," she said gently. "If 5 experts struggled, mocking us proves what exactly?" His smile never changed. His jaw did. He clicked his pen once. "Intelligence isn't inherited here," he said, and the sentence hung between them like a draft from a door you didn't know was open. Lucy's eyes cooled a degree. Not angry. Exactly clarified. Carmen stood very still, the way you do when you don't want a tray to rattle. Rick capped his pen, slid the papers back into the leather folder, and reached for the shape of authority that fit his hand best. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Come back tomorrow. Let's see if the kid can even pronounce a single line." The afternoon light laid itself across the office like a long, patient hand. Down below, traffic idled and inched near the Riverwalk. But up here, the only motion was the slow drift of shadows as the sun slid west. Rick kept his schedule fierce and neat, but the day had stretched in odd ways since the girl and the library card had shown up. He told himself it was an amusing diversion and nothing more. They came again, just before 5. Carmen eased the cart through the door with the same quiet care as yesterday. Lucy followed, backpack snugged up on both shoulders. She stood by the corner of the desk, waiting to be addressed, not assuming her presence was invitation enough. The red bracelet showed itself and disappeared as she smoothed the sleeve of her sweater. He noticed it now, the way a person notices the tick of a wall clock once someone points it out. Rick opened the leather folder as if opening a game he intended to win in 2 moves. "We'll be efficient," he said. "I have a call." He set his pen across the top page, a narrow underline beneath a block of characters that looked like tidy vines. Lucy didn't reach for the paper at once. She set her library card down in the same place as before, a tiny ritual that steadied her. "If you'll allow," she said, "I'll look for something short. I can explain how I approach it. I won't pretend beyond what I know." He gave a small nod, the kind he used when a contractor promised a deadline he could live with. Carmen stood a little behind her daughter, hands folded, eyes on his face, but ready to fall if the wind changed. The girl leaned in and traced the lines with her gaze, not her fingers. "My teacher at the library, Dr. Mei Huang, starts us with the building blocks. She calls them radicals. They're like roots in a garden. If you know the roots, you can guess what grows." She caught herself and smiled, apologizing for the metaphor with her eyes. "Here." She touched the air above a character. "This piece shows up in words about speech, and this one suggests a mouth. It doesn't give me the whole meaning, but it points me in the right direction." Pointing is not translating, Rick said, but he found himself listening the way he sometimes listened to an engineer explain a system he didn't personally use, but trusted to keep his buildings cooled and humming. "No, sir," she agreed. "It's a first foothold." She breathed once, the way singers do when they find their note, and tried a line. The sound rose, held, and stayed. She corrected a dip with a small shake of the head, then steadied. When she finished the short sentence, she translated not word for word, but idea for idea. Something like, "A thought kept soft becomes clear," she said. "I can't promise the poetry, but the sense is there. Carmen's shoulders lowered a fraction. Rick didn't smile. He also didn't snort. The copier down the hall started again, that soft plastic rain on the roof. He picked up his pen and set it down, a rhythm that had nothing to do with irritation and everything to do with an unease he didn't intend to name. "Where did you pick up the tones?" he asked. "If you've been at this, a few years?" 2.5, she said. "Tuesday nights at the library. Dr. Huang says if you think of the first tone like holding a note high and level, it helps. She taps the table to show us. We hum. Sometimes the elders who volunteer hum along. It's slow. We laugh at ourselves a lot." Her mouth softened at the memory. "Kindness helps people keep trying." That word again. He set the pen farther away, as if it might jump back into his fingers. He gestured at the page. "Try one more." She did, not because he ordered it, but because the doing gave her some small, private satisfaction. When she finished, she waited for his verdict, not braced like a soldier but ready like a student. He could have praised, he could have mocked. He chose a different path, one he found more comfortable than either. "How many languages do you speak, Lucy?" She kept her eyes on his, steady. "I'm learning. Speaking and reading aren't the same. I practice what I can, where I can." She hesitated. "May I ask how many languages you speak, sir?" The air shifted a degree. He could have called security, and no one would have questioned him. He could have laughed, and the sound would have bounced around all this glass and found places to hide. Instead, he measured his reply, trimming it to something he could live with later. "Fluent? 1. Enough for my work." "Then maybe this isn't a fair contest," she said, quiet as a church step. "If 5 experts struggled, mocking us proves what exactly?" He closed the folder with a thumb and forefinger precise. "It proves I value results," he said. "And I don't confuse effort with outcome." Lucy accepted the statement the way you accept weather. "Understood." She tapped her card once, a whisper of plastic on wood. "May I tell you one more thing my teacher says? Words travel farther with gentleness than with force. Not for the paper, for people. Gentleness has a ceiling," he said. "Maybe," she allowed. "But ceilings can be made of glass." He looked at her then, fully, and for a second saw not a child or an employee's child, but a person who didn't flinch from what she believed was true. He broke eye contact first, not because he'd lost, but because something like memory tugged at him. He reached for his notebook to make a note he didn't need, and when he flipped it open, a narrow strip fluttered loose 3 tiny squares of faces from a machine that ate quarters and spit out laughter. Market Square. A fall night long ago. He caught it in his palm and slid it back without comment, the way a man slides a lost coin back into his pocket. Lucy had seen enough. The date printed faintly at the bottom, 2012, wasn't loud, but it was there if you knew to look. Her brows lifted just a little. A file opened in her mind and left on the desk with the others. The red bracelet warmed against her pulse. Carmen cleared her throat softly. "We should get back to the floors, Mr. Sawyer." He glanced at the clock. The call at the hour had been moved without him noticing he'd asked his assistant to move it. "Fine," he said. "I suppose we made some progress." The concession tasted odd, neither bitter nor sweet. They worked around him, making the room look like it had always looked, which is a kind of magic that goes unremarked. Rick tried to read a report and found he had to read the same paragraph 3 times. He stood and faced the windows. San Antonio spread like a quilt-stitched roads, squares of light coming on as the sun thought about leaving. When they finished, Carmen pushed the cart to the door and paused. "Thank you for the time," she said simply. Lucy lifted her library card, a small salute. She kept her eyes courteous, unafraid. He held the folder a heartbeat longer than necessary and set it down. "Same time tomorrow," he said. "We'll see what else you can do." In the hallway, the carpet swallowed their steps. The elevator waited with its open mouth and polished teeth. Carmen leaned toward her daughter, voice barely above the hush of the vents. Carmen whispers in the hallway, "We won't push it." Lucy answers, "We don't have to." The Carver branch settled into evening the way a porch settles into shade, slow, familiar, a little creak in the floorboards. Fluorescence hummed, not harsh but steady. The front doors sighed open and shut as neighbors drifted in, sweaters over the arm, the day's dust still on their shoes. A hand-lettered sign near the desk read, In bold marker, Colorado Immunity Language Night You Matter, 2 Importas. Someone had taped a small paper star in the corner, just for cheer. Rick paused just inside and let the air find him. It smelled of paper and coffee and whatever polish they used to make old wood glow for one more season. He signed the volunteer sheet because Ruth Delgado pointed at it with a gentle, implacable finger and said, "Everyone signs, dear." "Welcome." She put a name sticker on his lapel like she'd done it for him in kindergarten and moved on to greet the next arrival with the same warmth. He had never been looked after and gently bossed in the same breath. Dr. Mei Huang gathered a half circle by a whiteboard. She wore a cardigan the color of early pears and small earrings that caught the light when she smiled. The tone marks were already up simple, clean strokes. "Good evening, friends," she said, voice soft but exact. "Hi, folks. We'll start together. Breathing helps." She tapped the table with a fingertip. "High and level hold it as if you're humming. Ready?" The group hummed like a modest choir. Rick tried, found the note, lost it, found it again. Dr. Huang nodded, pleased without fuss. "Yes, again." Lucy and Carmen arrived with the flow. Lucy's library card already in her hand. She slipped into the group near the back, listening first. Carmen stood a little off to the side, a tote over her shoulder, taking in the picture as if she were saving it to tell someone later. When Dr. Huang asked for a model, Lucy lifted a hand, not high, just enough. She held the first tone and lifted it a hair at the end to show the shape. Dr. Huang's smile widened. "Perfect. Thank you." "Oh." Rick risked a glance at Lucy. She didn't perform. She helped. When he let his tone sag, she made a quiet hum beside his steady, true, and his followed, as if her steadiness made a narrow path he could see. They worked like that simple, patient, no magic tricks, until the room's edges felt softer and the language felt less like a cliff and more like a hill with a decent footpath. Dr. Huang wrote a small phrase on the board and had them breathe before trying it. "Words have weight," she murmured. "Carry them kindly." On the opposite side of the room, a few folding tables held insulated coffee carafes and styrofoam cups. A retiree in a denim vest poured for whoever walked up and called everyone on. Rick gave him his cup back when he realized he'd taken the last splash and waited while the man shook the carafe to free 2 more thimbles. "No rush," the volunteer said. "We've got more in the back." Rick thanked him by name after reading his badge. It surprised him how good it felt to say another person's name into the air like a blessing instead of a command. Half an hour later, Ruth floated through again, a small clipboard tucked under her elbow. "We're crowded tonight," she said, quietly delighted. "Overflow room if we need it." She touched Rick's sleeve as if sharing a secret. "If a company we know ever wanted to help us stipends for tutors, bus passes for kids, we could double this in a month." She didn't press. She just set the idea down like a bowl of fruit on a table and carried on. Across the way, Dr. Samir Ahmed had written salam and its reply in gentle arcs. He stood with a posture that suggested a different life, once lecture halls, chalk dust, a courtyard with pomegranates. "Good evening, friends," he said, and a dozen voices answered, some shy, some brave. "We greet. We listen. We honor. Again." Rick tried the sounds, careful not to press them into his existing shapes. Dr. Ahmed nodded with the same calm approval Dr. Huang offered. Here was a man who could have towered if he'd wanted but chose to stand among. Lucy drifted between groups once Dr. Huang released them to practice. Not as a teacher, not as a kid being useful, but as someone who understood what it meant to learn and wanted that for other people. She set a sticky note on Rick's page with 2 tiny arrows showing where the tone should stay level. No comment, just the arrows. He tried again and let the sound ride where the arrows pointed. It worked. He felt oddly grateful. Carmen stepped into the hallway for a moment to answer a text from a neighbor and paused by the corkboard. The same words from the sign, "You Matter," 2 Importas appeared on a flyer for tutoring hours, the letters done by 2 different hands. She touched the chain at her throat, finding the small pendant without looking, tracing the familiar words with a thumb that had polished them over the years until they had the gloss of kept promises. She closed her eyes for a breath, a prayer shaped like gratitude and worry in equal parts. Back in the main room, Dr. Huang brought the circle together for a last round before the break. "High and level," she said. "We breathe first. We don't hurry." She tapped her 3 middle fingers on the table in a measured rhythm, and the group breathed with her. Rick felt his shoulders unclench a notch he hadn't known was tight. No one here asked for brilliance on the first try. No one snickered when he stumbled. They simply waited for him to find the note and then held it with him. Ruth returned, just as the coffee man shook the carafe again. She stood at the front with a librarian's comfortable authority, the kind born not of titles, but of years witnessing people do the best they can with the time they have. "Friends," she said, "thank you for being here. Our volunteers give their evenings, our neighbors bring cookies, and somehow this little room holds more languages than any of us will ever master. But we can share the joy of trying." She glanced toward Rick in a way that included him without spotlighting him. "We're dreaming of a small fund to keep this going steady: bus passes, materials, a stipend so our elders don't pay out of pocket. If any of you know a company with a generous bone, a glint of humor, send them my way." Rick didn't wait for the break to decide. He stepped forward with the neat movement of a man signing a contract he'd already read. "Let's do it," he said, the words simple and clear. "A pilot scholarship. Materials. Whatever Ruth needs to build on what's happening here." The room did not cheer like a stadium. It breathed differently for a second, and then the clapping came. Not wild, but warm and surprised, as if a neighbor had said he'd fix the church steps this weekend, and everyone believed him. He saw Carmen's eyes change some mixture of relief and caution, and saw Lucy's mouth shape a small O before she turned it into a smile that kept its dignity. Dr. Ahmed's gaze softened. "Doctor." Huang tipped her head once, a quiet benediction. "Yes, but keep showing up." Rick stayed through the break and into the next set, taking notes in a hand that, for the first time in years, wasn't writing to impress anyone. He adjusted when Dr. Ahmed asked, hummed when Dr. Huang tapped the table, and surprised himself by meaning the thank yous that left his mouth. He left his empty cup in the bin by the door and straightened the stack of clean ones without thinking about it. Outside, the sky had turned that particular Texas blue you only get at the end of a clear day, deep enough to drink. The parking lot glowed under long lamps, moths writing their frantic poems in the light. Rick lingered by the steps as people drifted past with their tote bags and their good nights. He didn't want to be the last to leave, or the first. Carmen stood beside him, toed on shoulder, not seeking conversation, but not avoiding it either. He was the one who broke the small, companionable silence. "Thank you for," he paused, searching for something truer than the sentence he'd use at a gala, "for letting me be just a student in there." "Everyone's a student in there," she said. "It's one of the rules." He nodded. He was not used to rules he hadn't written. Lucy came down the steps 2 at a time and joined them, looking up through the glow with a face made older by thought and kept young by hope. She didn't speak first. She waited to see which way the wind would go. When Rick said nothing else, she touched the edge of her library card to her thumb, a small fidget she'd had since she could remember. They walked toward the cars together for a few steps, the evening soft around their ankles. Rick said goodbye without calling anyone staff, without reminding anyone of a schedule. He lifted a hand, ordinary and human, and got into his car. The engine turned over. He waited a beat while a family crossed behind him, and watched in his rear view as Carmen and Lucy stood for a breath longer under the library light, talking low. Lucy to Carmen low. "He's different here. Carmen, or he wants to look different." Polished silver, soft jazz, and a question sharp enough to cut. "Since when do CEOs take classes at public libraries?" The room lifted its eyes from crab cakes and iced tea. Oak Hills Country Club liked its quiet linen that didn't dare wrinkle, servers who seemed to glide, sunlight lying across the greens like a silk runner. Rick Sawyer set his napkin down and gave Ethan Cole the smallest of smiles, the sort you use when someone mistakes volume for authority. "Since they have something to learn," Rick said. Alex Montgomery leaned back in his chair, golf tan bright as a badge. "Come on, Rick. You're paying tutors now? Refugees and retirees coaching a Fortune 500 brain? That's a headline, I'll grant you." "Good afternoon, gentlemen," the server said, refilling water with a practiced tilt. She called Rick sir without a sliver of irony. He looked up, met her eye, thanked her by name. He'd read the brass pin when she approached, and saw the flicker of surprise that happens when a habit of respect lands where it rarely does. Ethan swirled a lemon wedge around his glass, expression dry. "What I'm wondering is optics. Country club donors hear you praising public libraries. They wonder if you've taken up causes instead of companies." Rick cut a slice of trout, the fork quiet against the plate. "We can read P-lists and still read the room, Ethan. And the city is the room." He gestured toward the window where a groundskeeper bent to fix a divot with the care of a jeweler. The people who make our days possible don't stop being people when we stop noticing them. Frank Vance dabbed at a spot on his cuff and shook his head. Since when did Sawyer Tech become a seminary? It didn't, Rick said. But we're going to sponsor a scholarship pilot at the Carver branch. Materials, bus passes, stipends for tutors so the elders don't pay to help us. He spoke as if confirming a shipment. Calm, certain. Ethan chuckled, not unkindly, but like a man who still believes he sees the chessboard better. Try it your way. Just don't mistake effort for outcome. Oh, effort is how outcomes get born, Rick said, and raised his glass of tea in a toast that nobody had to join. They did anyway, and the clink landed softer than the jazz. Conversation drifted to markets and weather. Rick kept his answers short. He found himself noticing small things. He used to miss the way a server steadied a plate with 2 fingers so it wouldn't sing against the table. The way the busboy waited until a story finished before reaching for the breadbasket. When the check arrived on a discreet tray, he signed without show and added a tip that matched his thanks, not his image. "Step outside with me," Alex said, nodding toward the terrace. The air smelled of cut grass and sun-warmed water. Golfers moved in near silence, little flags nodding, a cart pausing and then humming along. "Tell me the truth, Rick. Is this about guilt?" Rick watched a breeze lift the edge of a green like a page. "It's about accuracy," he said. "I thought being obeyed was the same as being respected. Turns out respect likes to be earned." Alex considered that, hands in his pockets. "And the library teaches you how." "It teaches me how to listen," Rick said, "and how to be ordinary for an hour. That's rarer than you think." His phone lit with a calendar nudge. The public kickoff hadn't been carved into stone yet, only suggested. He stepped a few paces away and called Ruth Delgado. She answered on the second ring, warmth pre-installed. "Carver branch," she said. Ruth speaking. "Good afternoon, Ruth. Let's put a date on that pilot scholarship launch. Next week, an early evening. Folding chairs, cookies, the squeaky mic, whatever makes it yours. That makes it ours," she corrected gently. "I'll post a flyer before the end of the day." He could hear paper in the background, the friendly racket of a building that works for a living. "Thank you," he said, and meant the fullness of the word. Back at the table, Ethan had his phone out, thumb-skimming headlines. "Just remember, Rick," he said without looking up. "No good deed goes unpunished. Press will spin it. Staff will expect raises you can't scale. Shareholders will ask why you're buying bus passes instead of patents." Rick sat, settled his napkin again, and poured a little more tea. "Gentlemen," he said, and his tone had a steadiness that didn't invite debate, "I'm sponsoring what matters." No one laughed. The jazz carried them to dessert menus and then to handshakes by the door. Outside, the afternoon leaned toward that particular Texas gold that makes even parking lots look generous. Rick thanked the valet by name and tipped without looking at the amount. The young man's face opened the way faces do when the math feels like kindness. Traffic on Fredericksburg Road moved like a conversation that knows when to pause. Rick drove without the radio, let the silence do its sorting. The library had a date now. The company would need a memo policies made of respect, not slogans. He pictured Lucy humming a tone for him to catch, Dr. Huang tapping the table in that unhurried rhythm, Dr. Ahmed sketching a greeting that felt like an open door. He pictured Carmen on the edges of the room, carrying the weight of both dignity and worry with the strength that never announces itself. By the time he reached home, the light had softened into the kind that makes even hard furniture look forgiving. He loosened his tie and stood a moment by the window. City stretched like a quilt beyond the glass. He thought of the long table at Carver with the coffee carafes and styrofoam cups, the tape on the floor where they kept moving chairs back into place. He thought of the sign written by 2 hands, "You matter, to Importus." Across town, the evening settled in different ways. Porch lights clicked on one by one. A bus sighed at a stop and then shouldered back into the lane. In a neat apartment with a tidy kitchen, Carmen set her toad on the chair and wiped the counter as if the day could be put in order with a clean cloth. The clock ticked like an old friend. Carmen, that night, opens a small keepsake box, a photo booth strip, Market Square 2012, and half a pendant engraved "To Importus." She closes the lid, resolved. It's time. A CEO with a script, a girl with a pendant, a mother with a secret in her purse. Carver Branch looked like a church basement the town loved, a little scuffed, always ready. Folding chairs marched in neat rows. A plastic table wore a rectangle of sheet cake with roses piped in frosting the color of autumn mums. Coffee carafes stood like small, patient soldiers beside stacks of styrofoam cups. On the wall, handmade posters read, "You Matter, 2 importas in 2 hands and 3 colors of marker." A fall breeze wandered in each time the glass doors sighed open. They'd hung a squeaky mic from a portable stand that had seen decades of PTA meetings. Ruth Delgado moved through the room with a clipboard and a smile that put people at ease the way a good quilt does warm without weight. She parked Rick by the end of the second row. "We'll keep it plain," she said. "Name tags. A few words, cake. Good evening, friends," that sort of thing. He nodded. He had a script in his pocket, typed neat and safe. He also had a tiny edge of nerves he hadn't felt since his first board presentation, back when suits were baggier and the stakes somehow seemed smaller. He watched volunteers tape down a loose cord with blue painter's tape so nobody would trip. He watched a teenager straighten the chairs once more. He took a breath. Lucy came in with Carmen, the girl's half pendant catching the light just once and settling back against her sweater like a small moon. "Doctor," Mei Huang greeted them with a warm, precise, "Good evening," then bent to adjust Lucy's name tag where the marker had smudged the Y. "There," she said. "We want folks to know who to thank. Doctor." Samir Ahmed set out an extra stack of programs and, seeing the crowd at the door, propped it open with a doorstop shaped like a book. A local reporter, camera on shoulder, manners intact, asked Ruth where to stand so he wouldn't block the grandparents. "Back by the returns cart," Ruth said. "You'll be perfect." She made a quick note on her clipboard, the pencil whispering across paper. A deacon from the parish down the street carried in a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic, like a gift from a careful aunt. In the small office off the main room, Carmen closed the door with a quiet click. She set her toad on a chair and pulled out a simple tin, the kind that once held butter cookies and now held lives. The photo booth strip from Market Square 2012 slid into her hand, edges worn by visiting fingers. The red woven bracelet lay beside it, bright as a whispered truth. She looked at Lucy. "After the speeches," she said, steadying herself on the words. "Not before. We let the room be about the students tonight." Lucy nodded. She touched her pendant once, as if checking a heartbeat, and tucked the tin back into Carmen's purse where secrets ride with grocery lists and aspirin and the receipts of an honest life. Back in the community room, Ruth did a small sound check. The mic let out a friendly squeal and settled. "Folks," she called, "we'll start in just a second, if you'll find a chair and a smile." People did. The room looked full without being pushy the way a good potluck table does when the casseroles keep arriving. Rick reached for the script and felt paper answer his hand. Then, as the room hushed, he noticed Lucy across the aisle, her fingers resting on the pendant, no flourish, just contact. He noticed the words on the posters, the same ones he'd seen on a small gold oval more than he wanted to admit. He noticed Carmen on the edge of the room, one hand on the tote, shoulders square the way some people stand when they've carried more than most and kept their manners. Ruth introduced him like you introduce a neighbor who volunteered to fix the steps. "This is Rick. He's helping us try a little pilot, a scholarship for our young folks, and stipends for our tutors, so our elders don't pay to serve. He also learned how to hum a tone without falling off it, which makes him one of ours." Laughter rolled out gentle and stopped on its own. Rick stepped to the mic. It wobbled, squeaked, held. He reached for the script and then left it where it was. "Good evening, friends," he said, and the words came easy in this room. "I brought notes, and I'll honor your time by not reading them." A ripple of appreciation moved through the chairs. Folks over 60 know the value of not drowning in paper. He talked for 2 minutes. He kept his hands still and his sentences human. He named what the room already knew, that libraries make space for the stubborn hope that learning isn't done yet. He thanked the tutors who give their evenings, and the teens who stack chairs, and the elders who bring cookies that taste like someone remembers your favorite. He promised bus passes and materials and a quiet fund to keep volunteer pockets from turning inside out. He did not mention ROI. He did not say brand. Then he did something he hadn't put on any list. He looked past the front row to where the staff in green aprons and quiet shoes stood along the wall, watching to see how long they'd be sweeping tonight. He said their names, one by one, without rush. "Thank you for making this place ready for us," he said. "For the shine on this floor, for the chairs that don't wobble, for the lights that come on and the trash that somehow takes itself out." He paused. The room clapped, long and warm, like rain that knows the garden needs it. Carmen's eyes glossed with a pride she didn't apologize for. Lucy's mouth made a small O and then turned it into a smile that kept its dignity. Dr. Huang stepped forward with a brief word in Mandarin about beginnings and patience. Dr. Ahmed echoed with a greeting that honored the room and the elders in it. The reporter stayed by the returns cart, as promised, catching faces more than speeches. The deacon's cookies circled the chairs and came back lighter. The mic squeaked once more, and Ruth tapped it like an old friend. "All right," she said. "We've all earned sugar. There's cake and coffee, and if someone doesn't take the corner piece, I will." Laughter again, simpler this time. She raised her voice without raising the temperature. Ruth announces, "After cake, a brief meet and greet." Carmen whispers to Lucy, "It's time." Sometimes family arrives in pieces, half a pendant, a faded photo, and a question you can't dodge. The room had thinned to its afterglow. Cake plates stacked in a leaning tower by the trash can. Frosting roses scraped down to green stems. Folding chairs stood like good soldiers waiting for orders. The fluorescent lights hummed softer, as if they, too, understood when it was time to lower their voices. Outside, the fall air pressed its cool palm to the glass. Inside, Ruth and the last volunteers whispered goodnights and slipped out, leaving the community room the way a porch looks after guests go, still warm, still holding the shape of laughter. Carmen asked for the small table by the corner, the one that didn't wobble. Ruth nodded and shut the door halfway. Not a boundary so much as a blessing. Rick pulled the chair back with the care of a man approaching something he had no right to rush. He sat. He folded his hands because he didn't know where else to put them. Carmen set her tote down and unlatched it with the same steady touch she used to turn off a lamp quietly, firmly, with respect for the dark. From inside the bag, she drew a simple tin, the kind that once held butter cookies. It made the smallest sound when it opened, a little breath in. She lifted the photo booth strip by its edges. 3 tiny squares, laughter half caught, a shoulder leaning into a shoulder, the blur that says someone moved because joy doesn't always sit still. Market Square, 2012, printed pale at the bottom like a date on the back of a school picture. She placed it on the table the way you place a picture on a grave, gently, like the ground could feel it. Next to it she set a red woven bracelet, its threads bright as a cardinal. She didn't add a speech to either object. She let them be. Rick took his leather notebook from his jacket and opened it to a page he'd memorized long ago. The same strip slid free and landed in his palm. The paper had thinned at the fold from a decade of being handled, but not healed. He put his copy beside hers, 2 images of the same moment, brought together like 2 halves of a sentence that had never finished. Lucy stood at the corner of the table, fingers on the edge as if she needed something solid under her. The small pendant at her throat caught the light once and gave it back. She touched it, not for dramatics, not for show, just to steady the beat that had quickened. Carmen spoke first. "We met at the market that fall," she said, voice even. "Before jobs changed. Before addresses changed. We were young enough to think the world would wait." She didn't offer blame. She wasn't offering absolution either. She was laying down the map. Rick looked at the photos and felt something in his chest he would not have called pain or regret. It was the feeling of a door he had walked past for years, realizing his hand had always held the key. He looked up. "I didn't look back well," he said. "I told myself the flight was on time and the offer wouldn't wait." Carmen nodded. There was the smallest tremor at the corner of her mouth. Then stillness again. "Life kept going," she said. "As it does." Lucy breathed. Once, like a singer finding the first note. She slid her thumb along the oval at her neck until the words under her skin reminded her who she was. Then she lifted her eyes, as straightforward as she'd ever been with him. "If it's true, may I call you Dad someday?" The room did not move. A chair did not creak. Somewhere down the hall, a clock thought about the top of the hour and decided to wait. Rick's hands went to his jacket pocket, not to hide, but to look for what he had brought without intending to use. He placed a small chain on the table, the other half of the pendant, its face worn smooth by years of fingers and worry and memory. He aligned the 2 ovals so the words could be read without guessing. 2 halves, finding one sentence. "If you'll let me earn it, yes." Carmen's breath caught relief and fear in the same measure, a balance she had learned to carry. She did not rush the moment. She reached out and laid her hand over the ovals, holding them still as if a draft might shuffle them out of place. Lucy placed her hand atop her mother's. Rick, slow as a man learning a custom he should have known all along, set his hand over theirs. It wasn't a dramatic embrace. It was a stacking of faiths. No one cried loudly. Lucy's eyes filled and didn't spill. Carmen's chin shook once and settled. Rick's face learned a new expression, the one people wear when they finally tell the truth to themselves and find it doesn't kill them. He spoke carefully, one plank at a time, building something they could stand on. "I should have looked for you," he said to Carmen. I should have answered the questions I didn't let myself ask. I can't rewrite that decade. I can write what comes next." He turned to Lucy. "I don't want a title on your lips before I've earned it in your life." Lucy nodded, the kind of nod that means both yes and slow down. "I don't need a billboard," she said. "I need consistency." Carmen exhaled. "Boundaries," she said, "and time that shows up when it says it will, and no announcements we can't take back." Rick smiled, the smallest smile. "No announcements," he agreed. "Real schedules. A counselor who helps us not skip steps. And no cameras, unless you say so." They talked softly then, not to solve it all, but to set the first fence posts. Tuesday evenings were already spoken for language night. Sunday afternoons offered room for a walk on the Riverwalk if the weather behaved. Thursdays could hold homework at the kitchen table where Bill's also lived. Holidays would be another conversation, later, when everyone had their footing. He offered to call a counselor. Carmen offered a name from the parish list. Lucy offered to make a list of her school events and the ones that mattered most. The acts were small and felt, in that room, like the building of a bridge plank by plank with nobody yelling about how fast it ought to get done. Silence joined them and did not feel like a stranger. Out in the main space, Ruth's cart rattled once and then quieted. Someone locked the front doors with the sound of a key turning home. The library held them for another minute, like a good host lets you linger in the doorway. Rick looked at the photos again, and then at the two halves of the pendant. "I'm sorry," he said, not as a performance, but as a fact. "I will be sorry and useful, not just sorry." Carmen's eyes met his. "Usefulness helps," she said. "Showing up helps more." Lucy's voice was small and steady. "I'll have questions," she said, "and I'll want answers, even if they're, I don't know yet." "I don't know yet," Rick said. He glanced at the stack of programs by the door, at the poster that said, "You Matter, Tu Importas," in 2 hands and 3 markers. He let the words move from the wall to his pocket. "And I'll be there." They rose together, hands remembering how to work without trembling. Carmen nested the photos back into the tin with the care of returning a relic. Lucy fastened the half-ovals side by side so they lay against her sweater like 2 notes that had decided to harmonize. Rick folded his chair and leaned it into the stack like he'd seen the teens do. He turned off the mic at its switch, a small click that sounded like a promise more than an ending. At the door, Ruth lifted an eyebrow in question. 3 nods answered her, one from each, different and the same. She smiled, satisfied, and flicked off 2 lights, leaving the room in the gentle half-dark that teaches you to walk by memory. They stepped into the corridor where the floor wax gleamed and the bulletin board held the week's hopes in pushpins. The night smelled like cooled asphalt and the ghost of coffee. Cars idled, then left. The city went on being a city. Rick, "We'll do this right counseling, boundaries, the whole thing." Carmen, "Then we start tomorrow." Anyone can promise. Earning takes calendars, counselors, and awkward first dinners. The morning began with a quiet that felt useful. Rick put his phone face down and opened a paper planner an assistant had given him years ago as a novelty. He wrote in it actual ink because the day seemed to ask for something you could hold. 9 o'clock, family services. Noon, prep remarks. 4 o'clock, staff meeting. 7, supper, the 3 of them. He said the times out loud in the empty kitchen, like a man learning a new prayer. The family services office had soft chairs and a box of tissues everyone pretended not to see. A framed watercolor of a live oak hung on the wall. Beneath it, the counselor spoke in the steady tone of someone who had watched storms and knew where houses break. She set simple rails. "We'll meet each week for now," she said. "We practice listening. We ask permission before big steps." She looked to Lucy. "You set a boundary." Lucy folded her hands and met the moment. "No surprises," she said. "If you want to post a photo, ask first. If you can't make it, say so early. I prefer a simple text to a grand apology." Rick nodded. "No surprises," he repeated, tasting the shape of the restraint. "Ask before posting. Say so early." Carmen added one more. "We don't make the past a courtroom every time we sit down. We can visit it when the counselor says we're steady." The counselor smiled like someone approving a good plain recipe. "That will do for today," she said. "Small, repeatable things build trust." Outside, the day had ripened into the kind of Texas blue that makes you think of porch swings. They stood for a minute near the old oak in the parking lot. A church bell somewhere tested the noon hour with a single, friendly note. Rick adjusted his cuff and let himself say it. "I'm nervous about the staff meeting." "Good," Carmen said. "Nervous means you know it matters." She looked at him, not unkind. "Speak simple. Say you were wrong. Call folks by name if you can. Don't sell your apology." He thanked her, and they let the noon light do a little of the talking for them. Back at the office, the auditorium felt less like a stage and more like a big schoolroom with better chairs. Facilities had propped the doors open. It had set a single microphone on a rolling stand. Someone had taped down cords that might try to trip you. Rick asked them to leave the house lights on. He wanted to see faces. He didn't start with slides. He started with breath. "Good afternoon, friends," he said into the ordinary hum. "I was wrong." The words were plain and fitter than the suit. He spoke about habits that had grown into blinders, about mistaking being obeyed for being respected. He named the night crew and the day crew, thanked them for all the ways a building quietly works, and did it without flourishes. Then he laid out changes, shaped for real life, respectful forms of address, baked into training, tuition help for hourly workers, taking classes at night. A mentorship ladder that didn't forget the folks who polished the floors. He added one more line that hadn't been in the draft. "If you see me miss it," he said, "say so. My office door isn't just for people with titles." Ethan Cole asked the questions a careful CFO is hired to ask. Budget guardrails? Timelines? We need measures so the good doesn't drift into noise. "We'll publish dates and owners," Rick said. "Quarterly updates, transparent numbers. Respect isn't against the bottom line." Ethan gave a short nod that meant he'd hold the numbers and the principle at once. No theatrics. Professional. Applause came in pockets, like rain on separate porches, then joined into a steady fall. Rick stepped down from the little platform and spoke with the custodial lead about schedules that made room for GED classes. He learned the name of the woman who always reset the sixth-floor thermostat so the meeting rooms didn't feel like January. He meant his thank yous and let the words work without exclamation points. The PR team waited in a side room with a slide deck that flashed color when the laptop woke. "There's a real story here," the director said. "Video with the library. A campaign about second chances. If we move fast." Rick held up a hand like a crossing guard who knows the traffic pattern. "No cameras. We fix first, then talk maybe." The word maybe landed like a period big enough to see from the back row. The team blinked, then nodded, recalculating for a world where not everything had to be branded to count. Late afternoon arrived with that slant of sun that turns dust into gold for a minute. Rick stopped by the lobby and thanked the guard by name. He held the elevator for a woman pushing a cart piled high with boxes of copy paper. He didn't make a speech about it. He used his hands. Evening brought them to Magnolia Pancake House. The three of them at a corner booth that had seen birthdays and apologies and Saturday teams after lost games. The server greeted them with a low, "Hi there, folks," and a coffee pot that made the right sound in a cup. Lucy ordered pancakes, the kind that come with butter that melts at the edges. Carmen asked for chicken and dumplings if they had it tonight. The server smiled, "Yes, ma'am," and brought extra napkins without being asked. They didn't talk like a movie. They talked like people who wanted to get it right. Rick asked about the school play and whether the Riverwalk was too crowded on Sundays. Lucy said she liked the quieter stretch near the museum reach, and that she could hum tones while they walked if he didn't mind sounding like a broken instrument together. He put his phone in his jacket and left it there. When the server refilled coffee, he used her name and meant the thanks. The tip later matched the kindness, not the price point. There were awkward parts. Lucy asked where he had been on one long-ago birthday. He said, on a plane, and then, I'm sorry, and then as promised, I don't know yet how to repair that, but I will show up now. Carmen told a story about a school fundraiser with weak lemonade and good laughter. They let silence sit with them and didn't rush it out the door. When the plates were cleared, Rick slid a small notebook from his pocket. I made a list, he said, sheepish as a boy. Things I can do without waiting for someone to invite me. Tuesday nights are yours, language night. Thursday dinners if you'll have me. Sundays after Mass for a walk if that fits. Lucy smiled at the word fit. That fits, she said. If you text by noon, I will. They paid at the counter because that's how Magnolia was built. The cashier tucked a small peppermint into Lucy's hand and one into Carmen's. And then, after a beat, into Rick's. 2. Outside, the air felt like a clean page. On the sidewalk, their breath made small clouds. Headlights slid by, unbothered. Rick was about to say goodnight when Lucy's phone buzzed. She glanced down and the screen lit her face with the kind of surprise that doesn't sting. Text from Ruth. Market Square has a fall night fair tomorrow. Photo booth's back. Lucy looks to Carmen. Carmen smiles. Let's go. The old photo caught a beginning nobody understood. The new one will catch a promise everybody can feel. Historic Market Square bloomed under string lights and a sky the color of polished pewter. A Tejano band worked a gentle groove from the far corner. The singer tipped his hat between songs and called, "Good evening, friends," and folks answered with a wave the way neighbors do. Stalls offered tamales wrapped tight as little gifts. Churros dusted like first frost. Aguas frescas bright in clear tubs. The air smelled of cinnamon, cooked corn, and something sweet you couldn't name but knew from childhood. They walked three together, Carmen with her careful tote, Lucy with the pendant settled at her collarbone, Rick with his hands empty on purpose. The photo booth stood where it always found work at fairs and weddings, a red curtain and a small stool, the faint heat of a machine that prints joy for pocket-size keeping. The line moved without impatience. People chatted about the weather and grandkids, and which stall made the best gorditas this year. Lucy watched a family squeeze inside and try to get everyone's faces into the frame. She laughed when the littlest's beau took up the whole first shot. "We used to do this," she said, as if the past were a porch you could still see from the road. Carmen nodded. "We did," she said, "and we will again." Their turn came. They stepped inside the booth, the three of them close enough to hear each other breathe. Rick reached for the small knob that adjusted the stool and then stepped back to let Lucy decide the height. The screen counted down, a soft 3, 2, 1. In the first picture, they looked surprised by how right it felt. In the second, they remembered to smile. In the third, the two half pendants touched and lay flat together, the words clear without effort. In the last frame, nobody posed. They just leaned, as if a bench under a live oak had found them. The strip slid out warm. Lucy held it by the edges and blew across the ink, a habit learned from some long-ago printer. Carmen took the next copy and smoothed it with 2 thumbs. Rick tucked the third behind his wallet, where bus passes and receipts might rub the luck onto it. He looked at the 4 squares, how a new thing can look like an old thing and still be new, and felt a steadiness settle where Flash used to live. They didn't make speeches. They bought a paper bag of kettle corn and shared it as they walked, passing the salt sweet back and forth without counting. Ruth appeared from the crowd with a wave, a flyer tucked under her arm. Dr. Huang and Dr. Ahmed walked together a few steps behind her, conversing in 2 languages that made one music. "Hi, folks," Ruth said, as if they'd met at the post office. "Nice night for pictures." She didn't ask to see the strip. She knew some things are better offered than requested. Rick showed her anyway. She gave a small, satisfied nod. "That'll look good on the fridge," she said, and drifted on to talk with a retired teacher who had promised to bring cookies to the next tutoring night. Morning came kind, the Riverwalk catching light the way a good story catches breath. They chose a quiet stretch near the museum reach, where cypress roots hold the bank and egrets lift like folded napkins. A small podium waited by the railing. A handheld mic sat beside it like a borrowed tool. No banners, no screens, just neighbors and a cluster of students and tutors who had learned to arrive 5 minutes early. Rick kept it brief. He didn't climb into the wind. He spoke into it. "Good morning, friends," he said, and the greetings gathered under the cypress-like shade. We're starting the Lucy Foundation for Dignity and Learning, and that is a long name for something simple. Bus passes, books, stipends for the elders who teach us, scholarships for kids who work as hard as anyone I've ever hired. We'll keep it small enough to keep it honest, and big enough to matter. He turned a half step and named people the way you name saints when you mean it. Dr. Mei Huang, who taps the table so we remember not to hurry. Dr. Samir Ahmed, who greets us as if we already belong. Ruth, who keeps a room open and a light on. And to our students, who let some of us be beginners again without shame. He didn't say Lucy's name to center her. He glanced at her and let the look do the work respect can do without noise. A few claps rose and then became many. Not a roar, just a steady yes. Mary Ellen Rodriguez, first of the scholarship cohort, stepped forward to say thank you and to promise, in plain words, that she'd mentor the next student coming up behind her. The mic squeaked once and then obeyed. When questions came, Rick answered in short sentences. Someone asked about returns. He said, "Lives that don't slip through cracks," and left it there. He closed with a sentence that had come to him while washing a tray at last week's potluck. Rich is who makes others richer in chances, not dollars. No one needed a banner for that. Sunday noon found them at the parish hall, where folding tables wore checkered cloths and pies, announced themselves without pride. Someone tuned a guitar in the corner. Kids ran around the long table once, were told to slow down, and did. The room smelled like coffee and casseroles that had names you knew without reading the index card. A woman in a blue sweater pressed a warm plate into Rick's hands and said, "Eat while it's hot, dear," with the authority of an aunt. He obeyed. Lucy carried a pitcher and refilled water glasses with the concentration of a waiter on his first day. Carmen slipped into the kitchen and came back with oven mitts, then returned with a pan someone couldn't lift alone. Rick took his suit coat off, rolled his sleeves, and stood where the rinsing needed doing. He didn't try to be noticed, he tried to be useful. Now and then, he looked up to see Lucy laughing with a pair of elders over how best to cut sheet cake without losing the corner roses. He thought of the tiny strip in his wallet and the bigger picture in front of him, and felt the two line up. Dr. Huang stopped by their table with a small container wrapped in foil. "Leftovers," she said. "Like blessings best the next day." Dr. Ahmed offered a phrase in Arabic that meant, "May you be increased," and translated it for the table so nobody felt left out. Ruth pinned a new flyer to the corkboard with a thumb firm from years of doing it. "That'll do nicely," she said to herself, and stepped back to make sure it hung straight. After plates were cleared and hands had been shaken and babies admired, the afternoon thinned into that easy hour when nobody wants to leave just yet. Rick stepped into the hall to breathe the cooler air. The church bell across the way tried a few notes. Not the hour yet, just practice. Carmen joined him and stood with the comfort of someone who has stood on this stretch of floor many times and survived worse news than she would ever say aloud. Lucy came last, a paper napkin folded in her hand like a small flag of friendly surrender. They didn't talk about the old photo anymore. They didn't have to. The new strip would find the front of the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a chili pepper or a mission bell. Next to it might go a schedule written in neat loops: Tuesdays at the library, Thursdays at the table, Sunday walks if the weather and the counselor agreed. The light, through the high window, made a pattern on the tile like water does when it has the time. Rick looked at it and thought of how slow can be a speed worth choosing. He thought of calendars and counselors and awkward dinners that weren't awkward anymore. He thought of the word dad as something that could be earned in small payments with interest. Soft, hopeful. A new flyer on the church board. Family literacy night, volunteers needed. Lucy tears a tab. Rick tears one too. Good evening, friends. Under string lights and church bell afternoons, a man who once lived above the city learned to live among it, returning to the library's long tables, speaking softly into a borrowed mic, standing at a sink in a parish hall, and at last stepping into a photo booth with two people who had waited for truth. The work didn't arrive in trumpet blasts. It came as steady appointments, small apologies, bus passes for strangers, and a new picture on a refrigerator door where two halves of a pendant finally lay side by side. If this story felt worth your time, please leave a 1. If it missed the mark or you'd like to offer a suggestion, leave a 0 so we can keep learning together. Here is what lingers. Kindness, repeated and ordinary, can change the course of a life. Every person deserves a circle to belong to and a hand to hold. People outrank money every single time. Offer a real chance, and quiet talent shines. Happiness grows when we spend ourselves for someone else. Like a small lamp left in the window on a stormy night, one faithful, neighborly act can guide a family, and sometimes a whole block safely home. And in the end, the richest person is the one who makes others rich in opportunity, dignity, and hope. Take a moment, if you will, to sit with that. Maybe picture your own kitchen table, or the old market where you once laughed into a camera, or the church steps where you always stop to visit. If this tale touched something tender in you, feel free to share it with a friend or join us again the next time we gather. No pressure, just an open seat and a warm light. And when the evening comes and the house gets quiet, may you see, as they did, that the true fortune of a life is measured in the soft glow of a porch light left on for one another.